So where we've been, where we talked about is this community called the yachad. That's what they called themselves. They didn't call themselves a sect of Judaism, right? They didn't have that. They didn't think in those terms. That's scholars looking back trying to figure out what do we do with these people. They called themselves the yachad. They considered themselves as true Israel, and they saw themselves as being having Kohanim at the leadership, Levites, and Israelites generally. The question was asked during the break: did they allow Gentiles to convert and become in? We don't have any evidence of that. In one place they do mention Gerim, but what's unclear is whether they're just using Gerim in terms of as part of Israel in the same way because they've just taken it from the Torah. All we have evidence for is that they wanted the house, what they call the house of Yehuda, to join with them, to leave what they were doing out there. Other Jews, they wanted to persuade other Jews to join their program and to get on board with them, because with them and their Ma'aseh HaTorah, their works of the law, and their community was where tzedakah was reckoned, where they would be reckoned as righteous and they would be vindicated at the end of time by God. That's really what the yachad believed. They believed they were going to be vindicated, that they had the correct interpretation of Scripture, and that it was only a matter of time and they would be steering the ship in Jerusalem. So it wasn't just that they had these community rules. They had an eschatological orientation. They saw themselves at a very specific place in how they envisioned history. And so they said, get on board with our program. It will be reckoned to you as righteousness, and it's going to be for the good of all Israel. So adopt our program. That's what they were all about. We shared a little bit about how these words kind of need context for us to really dial in what these different texts are meaning. And that's a principle we can take away whether we're studying the word works or any concept in Scripture. Just like you're going to take a passage and look at its context and where it is in the larger picture of the Bible, so too we're going to do that with words. Doesn't matter what it is you're studying, right? We want to be good stewards of the word, right? We don't want to be, what do we have to gain to twist Scripture, right? Why would we be, right? We're new creations in Messiah. Our desire is to worship God, right, according to the Shema, and we want to uphold His word and interpret correctly, and we want to teach it to the next generation and equip them so they can teach it to the next generation, and it can grow and be blessed. We're not interested in twisting Scripture and trying to get people to make radical, lunar Sabbath or whatever these kinds of crazy things that people are out there doing. We want to pursue righteousness. And so we want to approach the Scriptures with simple principles that reflect just weights and measures, right? Okay, so we looked at some Scriptures that use the word works, both in the Tanakh and in the apostolic writings, to see that there is this flexibility. And then we looked at how the word works was used in the Qumran, what we call the rule of the community, which is how they established their membership. And we see it wasn't just a easy, oh, you want to be one of us? Okay. No, they took it very, very seriously, as we saw. What I want to read now is a couple places where works is used specifically in what I've talked about at the very beginning, the halakic letter. It seems like I've taken the long route to get there, right? But the point is that even though we're going to spend some time in what we call the halakic letter, I wanted to give the background so that we see that there is a context here for the community and what their beliefs were. So in this, what we call the halakic letter, or 4QMMT, we have, I think there are 6 different copies at Qumran in different hands, different scribal hands, stemming from different times. So we know that people were studying this text and the community rule. This was defining their view of how they saw themselves as part of Israel. They were just educated this way, and this is what they believed. In the specific letter, called the halakic letter, it's the voice of and sadly we don't have the, like we have the beginning of Paul's letters that says, I, Paul, apostle, etc. We don't have the beginning. That's a bummer. But we know that it was studied, it was valued, it was seen. I wouldn't use the word canon, but we know that they studied it and that it reflected their ideals. Here's one section from Mikzat Ma'aseh HaTorah, halakic letter. All these translations, like I said, are taken from the Wise Abed Cook volume that you can find probably for $10 online. But I always look to the Hebrew and make sure that I'm happy, to my degree of competency anyway, with how I'm presenting it to you. These are some of the pronouncements, and this word here was mishpatim, concerning the law of God, specifically some pronouncements concerning works, which we have determined, and all of them concern defiling mixtures and the purity of the sanctuary. So remember, these are priests. The leaders of the yachad are priests that are not happy, right? They kind of have a grudge against those guys who are in Jerusalem, but they are going to hold to their view of how the priesthood needs to be run, even though they're physically not doing it. They know, just like the Republicans now are, okay, we know how we would run the government if we have a chance, and we want to have the chance. So think of that in that term. They expect to be back in Jerusalem, and they're focused on purity. Ritual purity is one of the biggest issues here. And so that was a phrase where works is used. Here's another one where works is used in the halakic letter. Now we have written to you some of the Ma'aseh HaTorah, works of the law, those which we determined would be beneficial for you and your people, because we have seen that you possess insight and knowledge of the Torah. So here is a verse where a passage where the author is writing, saying, we know you know some Torah. We know that, and it's kind of like, we know that you're really good at the Torah, and if you just come over to us and learn our way, and you'll be set. You've got some basic foundation, but you need to come be part of our community to really be on the right path. So, and this is, we see this word, Ma'aseh HaTorah, works of the law, which until the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, no scholar was ever aware of this phrase in Hebrew from the Second Temple period. Although, like we mentioned, that we know that some of those missionaries in the 1800s who translated erga nomu from Greek, works of the law, into Hebrew as Ma'aseh HaTorah, so they anticipated that actual phrase. Here are some, I have a list of 7 of, I don't remember, is there 24 actual different things, and some of them are fragmentary and they're hard to make sense of with some of them. But one of the works of the law, in one of the copies of the letter, has a calendar associated as part of the letter, a calendar. It's a 364-day calendar, so it's a 52 solar week calendar with Shavuot on the 15th of the 3rd month. So part of their understanding in terms of community formation and community boundaries was calendar. Well, if you have a 364-day calendar, you're going to have a problem, right? And they had Shavuot on the 15th, which means for Shavuot to be on the 15th of the 3rd month, it's not going to be on the 6th of Sivan or 7th of, right? It's going to be, you're counting the Omer after the whole week of Matzot. So this community believed, and this is something that we learn later, the Sadducees have this viewpoint, that the counting of the Omer is not to be as the way the Pharisees ruled, which says Mimacharat HaShabbat, the day after the Sabbath. The Pharisees say that is the day after, that's the first day of unleavened bread. The Sadducees said, no, you don't start counting for another week. So you had 2 different groups in Yeshua's day that had different pictures of when to start counting the Omer. One thing I believe that we can trust is Yeshua, especially when he says the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moshe's seat. I think one of those things I think we can safely say is he's not endorsing the Sadducean calendar there. So in my view, I think we're safe understanding the counting of the Omer according to the Pharisaic counting. But this group clearly had a different calendar. They were a solar calendar, not a lunar calendar. In other words, they were not marking months in the same way. And they had Shavuot on a different day, on the 15th of the month, which would have been different than that we see in majority of Judaism today. But we do have a writing from Josephus who writes about the Essenes, and it seems like the Essenes are associated either directly or very closely with this Qumran community in ideals. And he says that they're very strict in their observance of the Shabbat. There's certain things they do on the Shabbat. But Josephus, as far as Josephus is concerned, it's the same day. So even though the Qumran community differed in the counting of the Omer and had a 364-day fixed calendar, they observed the same day as Shabbat as the Pharisees did. And why that's important is that don't let anybody spin you on this lunar Sabbath thing. It's absolutely craziness. Don't even give them the time of day. I mean, encourage them to. I'm not sure what to do, what the best procedure is. I mean, if it's someone in your close family and network, you want to do your best to love them, but stick to your guns. We know that they were all keeping Shabbat. And the other thing, we have calendars from Qumran where it tells us what days of the month the Shabbat was on. And Shabbat can fall on any day, not just the days that these lunar Sabbath guys. Okay, that's just a footnote. So they had a certain calendar. Another ruling they have as a works of the law is Gentile grain. Do not eat it or touch it because it is defiling. So you don't eat or touch Gentile grain. They considered their camp, the yachad considered their camp as equivalent to the Israelite wilderness camp. The dwelling place that we know from other texts, not the halakic letter specifically, of God's holiness and even angels. So we know from other texts of the yachad, they believed that their camp was like the camp, the machana, in the wilderness, and that God's presence and angels were dwelling among them. So when they had to relieve themselves, they went out of the camp and did the dig the hole in the ground kind of thing. Because no dogs, no chickens, no excrement were permitted in their camp. And that was part of the ideology that they had for Jerusalem. They believed Jerusalem was the camp. And then the priests that were running Jerusalem weren't doing it according to their their liking. They believed angels dwelled among them. Here's another. One of their works of the law is that a fetus of a slaughtered cow is permissible to eat. So if they slaughtered a cow and it was pregnant, that animal is edible. So that's just an example of one kind of thing that they held to as a community. A single bone or a piece of bone was equivalent to contact with a corpse. So if you came across a bone and picked up a bone, boom, you've contracted, doesn't mean even if it's just a little sliver, you have contracted corpse defilement now. So you see how it's a biblical rule that's applied in a very specific way, and that's just the way it is. This is the way we interpret it. One of the ones that I think is really fascinating is what they call mutzachot, which are poured liquids or liquid streams. They say were not intrinsically pure. And I have to tell you that how abstract some of the words are. If we had a vessel, let's say you had a vessel that had liquid in it, and let's say a lizard had crawled in there and died, okay? So now, according to the Bible, what? All right, so this is okay, no good, no, I can't use this. So you have this vessel, it's got water and a dead lizard floating upside down in it, right? Now, if you have, let's say someone had a pure vessel with fresh water in it, like right out of a river or something, the Qumran community held that if I went to now pour that upper vessel, and they call it a mutzacha, is the stream, once that stream hits the water that has been defiled, that is called one body of water now. And the defilement travels upstream, and both vessels are now defiled. Okay? That's an example of works of the law from the halakic letter. The Pharisees, we know from the later, in the rabbis, the Mishnah, the rabbis of the Mishnah associate that view with the Sadducees, that it was the Sadducees who believed that the two, because of the mutzacha, because of the liquid stream, it consisted instantly of one body of water. The Pharisees didn't believe that. They believed that you could keep pouring and it can't, the tameh, the defilement, can't travel upstream. This upper vessel here is unaffected whether you're pouring it in there or not. The vessel up here is staying pure, if it was originally pure. So that might seem, to our day, that seems like, why would they be even occupied with that type of legal detail? You know, the scholars have talked about it and you can chew on it. But it was a point of division. It was a point of division. And this is one of the things they're saying, if you need to adopt, we know you've got some competency in Torah. We know that you're good with the Torah. Adopt our program and you'll be righteous. It'll be reckoned to you as righteous. Oh, by the way, one of these things is the mutzachot, you know, the uncleanness travels upstream, basically. Sounds strange, but that was a type of stringency that that they held to. What?
How do the mikvahs work then?
I think the mikvah always has an in and out.
Yeah,
So it's a.
Uncleanness went up, then whatever source it was coming from was unclean.
The mikvah cannot be unclean, because by definition, a proper mikvah is a gathering of a living water. So the idea is it's always flowing. This is I'm glad you pointed that out, Caleb, because the idea is you have a vessel that's already been broken up. It's not a mikvah, right? You have this vessel of water that maybe you had in your house and an animal died in it. What do you do now? And what situation would they pour that in? I don't know. But this was just this legal situation. So one Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, Robert Kugler, writes that the halakic letter, quote, intensifies and expands the biblical restrictions on persons associated with the cult. He uses the word cult here in a sociological, the temple priesthood. So he sees time and time again these ma'aseh haTorah, these works of the law, are how the priesthood need to be doing their business. And it's based off the written scripture, but there are very specific intensifications and expansions of biblical law that then are ruled as authoritative. This is the way, and there's no budging on it. That's what the halakic letter consists of. And the end of the letter, which we do have, I think there's a couple copies that have the end. Now we have written to you some of the ma'aseh haTorah, some of the works of the law. So there are others. This is just miktzat, meaning some of the works of the law. Those which we have determined, and they would be beneficial for you and your people. So this is another Jewish group they're writing to, because we have seen that you possess insight and knowledge of the Torah. Understand all these things and beseech him, that is the Lord, to set your counsel straight and to so keep you away from the evil thoughts and the counsel of Belial. And this word thoughts is machashvot. They use the verb chashav when they're talking about rendering legal decisions. So they say, which we have determined, it's chashavnu, which in modern Hebrew we think choshev, I think. For them, choshev meant we have come to a legal opinion that is binding on our community. That's what that is. And so when they say keep you away from the evil machashvot, it's from this other group that has, it's not like the devil teaching people to sin in the way we think generally. It's that other group of Jews that are telling you to interpret the Torah differently. See? That's something you got. So it's not, the counsel of Belial is not like, oh, the devil tempting people to commit adultery or to rob. It's not that. It's these other Jews who are telling you to interpret the Torah differently. They're the bad guys, right? Then you shall rejoice at the end of time when you find the essence of our words to be true, and it will be reckoned to you as righteousness, in that you have done what is right and good before him, to your good and to the good of Israel. That's how the halakic letter ends. So what captured scholars' attention was that, wow, we have ma'aseh haTorah, we have works of the law, we have this phrase, it will be reckoned to you as righteousness. We have this list of things that people have to do that are based on the law of Moses. What do we do with this? Did Paul know this community? You know, there's similar phrases in Galatians, so scholars have written all back and forth, no, yes. Let's see, right now I've got about 20 minutes. I'm going to try to get through some stuff, and then we'll go questions. I thought, oh, what's that? Because we want to wrap up by 12:30, right? For lunch, we got people, or okay, 20 minutes. Thank you. There's another group called ironically, they're called the Chavurah, that the early rabbis write about. There was the Chavurot, and it was these loose fellowships in the Second Temple period that also had very specific rules, because it just means it's just a general term meaning fellowship. And I want to share a little bit about what Jacob Neusner, another scholar that I'm leaning on here, maybe I'm sure a lot of you have a Jacob Neusner book or 2 or 100. He's written so many in your libraries. He says, basically, I'm going to paraphrase, that the Chavurah was a religious society founded in villages and towns during the Second Temple period, late Second Temple period, in order to foster observance of the laws of tithing and ritual purity. And according to Neusner and other Jewish scholars of this time, the reason I say Jewish is because a lot of the Christian scholars up to today, they're thinking only, how does this apply to the gospel? How does this apply to the gospel? And that's a good question. But sometimes they go and they're not letting the Jewish text speak its own voice because and so that's why when I say it's a Jewish scholar, it's a historian who's not bent on finding Jesus or Paul under every rock, right? They're trying to see it as part of larger Jewish history. So that's why I qualify that. Neusner says, we cannot automatically equate Pharisaism with what the rabbis are talking about, the Chavurot, or the fellowships or associations. Although we can see similarities, there are no sources that prove that when the rabbis are, because the rabbis they're describing the Chavurot, but they're not claiming that it's their group. But they do have insider terminology that they share. They're talking about ma'asarot, which are tithes, tohara, purity, washing of hands, etc. Here's a little bit of what Neusner writes. The chaver, and this is, today if you take modern Hebrew, a chaver can just mean a friend or associate, right? This is a technical term that they used at this time. The chaver, or member of such a chavurah, undertook to carry out, even in the company of non-observant men, those ritual laws that were generally neglected. So tithing and purity, they thought, wow, most of the people out here, they're Jews, they don't know how to tithe, they don't understand the laws of purity. So they had this kind of grassroots thing to up the ante on those commandments to make sure people were observant. And this was kind of all over without a hierarchy. At the Qumran, we have a specific hierarchy. We have the yachad, we have these branches of groups that are all submitting to this program. With the Chavurot, it's more like this grassroots. There's no centralized authority, but there's a general notion, yeah, we all want to make sure we're tithing and we're living in ritual purity. They taught their observance by example and by precept. At the same time, the members distinguished themselves from the common society, that's what they call the Am Haaretz, by their strict adherence to ritual laws that separated them in crucial relationships of daily life. Thus, members of the Chavurot cast up a barrier between themselves and the Am Haaretz, Neusner uses that word, who was by definition a source of ritual defilement. So here are some examples. Within the Chavurah. I'm stepping away from the Dead Sea Scrolls for a second. It was they had the ideal that it was the obligation that Jewish men keep ritually pure. So you must stay ritually pure, which technically, if we're biblical, in terms of biblical, purity was required if you wanted to visit the temple and offer sacrifice, right? There's no law that says that the person has to be ritual pure all the time if he's just living out in the land. So, because remember, ritual purity does not mean sin, or ritual impurity does not equate sin. We need to remember that, right? So that's not the same as saying, oh, men can just sin if they're not in a temple. That's not. We're talking about ritual purity. that they believed that Jewish men could be trained up over time and in stages, in a similar way to we saw with the yachad, in the practice of tithing, ma'asarot, and purities, taharot. They took great care to separate tithes and offerings, and they held that chulin, which is common food, was to be eaten in a state of ritual purity. So even this is where Neusner talks about the table fellowship becomes, in the home, becomes more and more influenced by priestly activities and priestly notions of purity now are transferred because of the scene of maybe slack observance among the Amei Haaretz, the people of the land. Like, we want to demonstrate to them biblical principles about relating to priesthood purity in our own tables, in our own homes. Neusner writes, the fellowship posed a particular problem for the city. At many intimate and crucial relationships in daily life, the chaver, the member of the community, was guided by a complicated rule that made social intercourse enormously difficult. So because he wants to adhere to a certain ritual purity in his life, but he has to go down to the shuk and buy some stuff, and where, is this going to make me unclean, and how do I know, etc. Here are some quotes that the early rabbis write about the chavurah. Remember, they're not saying this is us. They're talking about the chavurah as a distance. One taking upon himself to be ne'eman, which means faithful. He tithes what he eats, he tithes what he sells, and he tithes what he buys. So he's making sure that he's always in a position where he's tithed. Because sometimes he might want to buy grain in the market, and he's not sure if he can trust the guy, even though the guy's Jewish. I'm not sure he tithed, so I'm going to tithe it to make sure. And he will not be the guest of an am haaretz. So that means he won't go into the house and be a guest at a meal of an am haaretz. Now, this is a Jew that he won't go into the house of. We're not talking about Jew-Gentile. We're talking about Jew-Jew. They also say, the one taking upon himself 4 things. And this phrase, for those who know Hebrew, it's hamikabel alav, the one who receives upon himself. 4 things. They accept him as a chaver, not to give a heave offering to an am haaretz, not to give a tithe to an am haaretz. Because if I have a tithe, let's say I harvest my grapes and I have a tithe, I'm not going to entrust them to an am haaretz to take to the temple, right? Because that could, if he goes in and selling it, now I'm legally restricted by divine law from eating any of my grapes now because they haven't officially been tithed. So I got to make sure my tithe gets to where it goes. I'm not going to trust an untrained am haaretz to do that for me. We're not talking about a Gentile. We're talking about another Jew who doesn't have the proper, that I can't trust, basically. Not to prepare his food for an am haaretz. And Neusner, he translates that. He says to not prepare food in the house of an am haaretz. And I need to go to check the Hebrew on that because he might have mistyped the Hebrew. But the idea is there's a concern of when I'm preparing, if I'm a chaver, preparing my pure food, and if there's an am haaretz around, I got to keep an eye on him because he might spoil the whole thing. And the last thing, that to be accepted as a chaver, I have to eat my common food in a state of ritual purity. So now the person who's eating is taking on stringencies, priestly stringencies, that the Bible doesn't put on a person, but have to put that on in order to be accepted in this association. Another place is they accept him, that is, he's accepted in the community with regarding to knafayim, which literally means wings, but it's what they call the washing of hands. First, they will accept him as a chaver according to the washing of hands, and afterwards, they will accept him in terms of pure food. If he takes upon himself nothing except for the washing of hands, they still accept him. But if he takes upon himself the purities for food, but did not to take upon himself the washing of hands, he is not ne'eman. He's not to be entrusted with food. So you see that there's it's like social groups where there's very specific manners that have to be adopted and practices so that I know that you can trust me and I can trust you and we can eat each other's house. That's what's going on here. There's no discussion of meat and milk in this, if anybody's asking. When the rabbis are talking about the chavurah, we don't have any record of that being part of the discussion. It doesn't mean it wasn't, it's just that we don't have any sources telling us that. So if we just take a moment and we look at the community of the yachad, and we look at how the early rabbis described these chavarot, these various fellowships, adopting very specific ritual, purity, and tithing practices, we can see some things. Both of these, if we want to call them societies, they consisted of learned Jewish men, right? It's always guys, ladies, that are coming up with this stuff, right? Jewish males that are learned, that are envisioning that their practices that they're doing are fulfilling covenant obligations for Israel. They both would agree that way. Both are having specific regulations for members' interaction with outsiders. And there's not a lot in these cases of Gentiles, right? We're just talking about Jews differentiating themselves from other Jews that they think are lax on their observance. Both had procedures over time and in stages for outsiders, that is Jews, outsider Jews, to become officially accepted members. There was no central leadership with the chavurah or hierarchy, only members, chaverim, and non-members, amei haaretz. So you would learn, as you became a chaver, you would learn to identify other chaverim, and you would look at basically the map of the Jewish world then for you is chaver or am haaretz, right? Every Jew you'd meet, you'd be asking in the back of your hand, because if it's an am haaretz, I'm not going to go to his house because I could contract ritual impurity. So you imagine how these play out in social life. In contrast, the yachad had a very strict hierarchy, and it was likely that the Qumran was their central location and it had different branches. The sources for the Chavarot are in the early Rabbinic literature. So we don't have first century writings. We have second century rabbis reflecting back and telling us about the Chavarot. So whereas with the yachad, we have their actual texts. So there's a little bit of methodological difference we have to differentiate here. And as far as we can see with the sources we have, remember primary sources, I think I started saying that. Primary sources was when I can see what the Qumran group said about themselves, right? That's a primary source. If I go to read Jacob Neusner's opinion about that, that's a secondary source, right? So I want to discern that. As far as our primary source is concerned, the Chavarot did not use the term works of the law. We don't have any example for those Chavarots using works of the law. So those are just some of the contrasts. But really quick, to wrap up, think about, and I know many of you have probably read Galatians maybe a gazillion times, right? Because our English translations are, variant one from another, and you might be frustrated, and you believe it's the Word of God, but it's like, how do I make sense of this? My suggestion is that when we understand what's going on the ground in the first century with different Jewish groups that have very compelling views of eschatology, of where we are and how Torah is to be interpreted, and this is it, and this is you'll be righteous. It's very different than saying, oh, I'm trying to work so I'm acceptable to God. That's not what the motivation is. The motivation is, boy, I want to be part of that group. And that's true in our world today. I could feel, some groups, it's like, wow, I want to be an insider in that group. What do I got to do to be an insider? And that's what we're talking about. I want to look a little bit at N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright is one of our teachers in the body of Messiah, and I've benefited a lot from his teachings. There's stuff I outright reject in his interpretation, so be discerning as you are with all scholars that you read. N.T. Wright says that yes, the yachad community and like the Chavarot, when they have these rulings, these are extra biblical. And he'll even say, yes, the works of the law, it's the same phrase that Paul uses, but the Qumran uses it for extra biblical law, but when Paul uses it, works of the law, he's talking about the 10 Commandments. He's talking about actual commandments. And he wants to say that Paul is arguing against the principle of God having a law that is obligatory on his people. That's what N.T. Wright wants to say Paul means when he says works of the law. But he's also saying, though, he'll confess, we don't really have any sources in the first century using works of the law in that manner. As a matter of fact, we only have the opposite. We have the yachad saying the works of the law are these very specific interpretations of what Torah has to mean, in order to be part of the righteous community at the end of days. And I think N.T. Wright, as much as I benefited from it, and as much as he's much more of a giant scholar than I'll ever be, I think he's just dead wrong on this. I think Paul is interacting in Galatians with a group that he's already been to and preached to, right? He says, you would receive me as an angel. Who are these people that are swaying you? That there's another group that's very similar. If they're not from the yachad, or if they're not from the chavurah, we don't know. But we know that they were a group that had a very compelling story. They had very specific program of what they believed was true sons of Abraham would be doing. I don't believe they were believers in Yeshua at all, these influencers, and that they had something called the works of the law that you had to adhere to in order for righteousness to be reckoned to you. And that these Galatians who had come to faith in Yeshua had not yet matured enough to recognize what it meant to be a new creation, and to what it meant that in the new creation, the new covenant, that it's the fulfillment of that big story, that promise all the way back to Abraham, our father, whose faith was reckoned to him as righteousness by the Holy One, and that his promise, right, that all the nations of the world would be blessed in you. And that this was tied in very, very specifically for Paul with the gospel, a message of Yeshua, who came and taught and lived a perfect, sin-free life. He died, he gave his life voluntarily, died and rose again, and you participate through the gift of the Holy Spirit. You participate in that death and resurrection as you confess your sin and you receive the new life. Like Paul says, he revealed his son in me, right? That you're a new creation, that your life is not your own. Just like Paul says, he says, it's not I that live, but Messiah lives in me. It's like Paul doesn't even know how to talk about himself anymore apart from Yeshua's life, because it's his resurrection life that is informing Paul's enthusiasm for life and for getting the message of the gospel out there. But these Galatians that he had preached to hadn't grasped, right? They hadn't fully grasped that. They believed it, but they hadn't grasped it. And there was this other Jewish group that came on with a real compelling story. And that story had this thing called works of the law, was part of the program. And in order to be reckoned as a true son of Abraham, for it to be reckoned to you as righteous, you need to adopt these, what I'm going to say, extra biblical, just like the yachad had, stringencies. And it would have taken time, just like we saw in these other, you would have moved up in stages, and slowly you would have moved from being an outsider, like these Galatians were feeling like they were an outsider and they were missing something, and they would become an insider, and they would just feel happy now and accepted because they're finally an insider by this group. Paul's not going to have any of that. As a matter of fact, he gives 3 examples right from the beginning of Galatians. He says, I received it not from men, right off the bat, the gospel. Then the first example he gives is his own story as a zealous persecutor of the ecclesia. He says, I thought I was doing God's will. Let me tell you how persuasive these little Jewish worlds get. His first one is, says, I was so zealous for the Torah, but it's not Torah, the true Torah. It's the traditions of the fathers, that I persecuted the church. Right? He gives himself first as the first example of how persuasive. And I exceeded in my zeal among members in my own nation, but I was dead wrong. I was zealous for the Torah, but it was not according to knowledge, right? Then the second example, he says that when I took Titus up to Jerusalem to see James and Kepha and Yochanan, and these pseudo-adelphoi, he says, these false brothers come in to try to compel them to it says they came in to spy out this eleutheria, this freedom we had in Messiah. But even Titus was not compelled to be circumcised. And I want to pause there. It doesn't mean Titus never was circumcised. It says that Titus did not receive circumcision as a result of peer pressure, right? It says Titus was not compelled to be circumcised. And we would not submit to them even for an hour. That's the second example. Persuasive Jewish ideology storming in, trying to disrupt people. The third one is where it's between him and Kepha at Antioch, where there were certain men, just Paul just says certain ones from James, and it doesn't mean James' authority, because we know even from James in Acts 15, he said certain ones from among us came to you with a message we did not send them with, right? They came from among us, but not by our sending. That's the third example Paul gives in Galatians. These men, certain ones from James, came to Antioch, and Peter, who, and it uses the imperfect verb, that he had, but he would eat. It was his practice to eat with the Gentiles. Table fellowship, right? We're to sitting and having table fellowship with people for fear of them. Even Kepha stopped eating with these people. How, if you were a Gentile and you're eating and learning from Kepha day after day, Shabbat after Shabbat, and all of a sudden these guys come in from Jerusalem, and maybe you've never even been to Jerusalem. These guys come in, and all of a sudden Kepha doesn't show up for meals anymore, and then Barnabas too, and now you're like, I don't belong. There's a social shame that happens. I'm an outsider. I need to do something. What's wrong with me? I thought I was on track. I mean, Kepha and Barnabas, they were sitting and eating and sharing. And we were growing in knowledge of God's word and what it means to follow him in righteousness. And all of a sudden they won't eat with us anymore? Could you imagine? Paul comes and he's like, no. Look at what you're doing. You are letting people who are zealous for Torah, but in the wrong way, not according to knowledge, as he says in Romans 10. They're zealous and they got a compelling story and they're good salesmen and they have answers for everything, but it's not according to the gospel. That's not the gospel of Messiah Yeshua. And that's the third example that Paul gives from his own experience of how powerful these little Jewish worlds can get. You get these real zealous leaders and their little posse around them, and they start publishing their tracts and their books, and everybody's like, that just seems like authentic Judaism. I just want to go drink it in and make sure I'm just getting the authentic thing. And it's Paul's like axe at the root of that tree right there. That is not where righteousness is. And if you're drawn into that, then you've got it wrong. You have missed the gospel completely. Because the anchor, the core, tzedakah, for tzedakah to be reckoned to you is a simple gift of faith that you receive in the gospel message. And that you can't budge on that. That's it. That is what the gospel message is. And you're like it says in John 1, that you were born not of the will of man, not of the will of flesh, right? But of God. You're a child of God. You're an heir of the promise to Father Abraham. And as it says in Romans 11 and in Ephesians 2, we all know the passages, otherwise you wouldn't be at this conference probably, that you understand that your status before your Father in heaven and as a son of Abraham is not dependent on what the Orthodox rabbi tells you. And you can love him to death. You know what I mean? I don't mean to death literally. I mean, you can pour out your love, and you can, like our brother Foster was sharing, try to find common ground and share. And that's similar to what Ben is talking about when you go and learning a culture's. It's really what Dr. Foster shared is a specialist example of that cultural anthropological aspect of what Ben's talking about generally with missions. You go to a place, and I'm not going to bring all my privileged white American Anglo-Saxon or whatever culture and impose that. I want to keep my ear to the ground. I want to appreciate the word of God is for these people. God's going to work out the details, but I want to make sure the plank is out of my own eye first, right? And I want to make sure that I'm giving the pure signal of the word of God, trusting that by his Ruach HaKodesh, he will bear the fruit and he will grow. And that's what Paul says. I water, or Apollos waters, we plant, but Hashem gives the increase. That's his operating principle. And so we got to remember that in this day and age, there's so many people like Art Scroll, they know how to make a beautiful book, right? They know how to make a beautiful book that's going to last for hundreds of years if it's well kept, right? And they know how to make Hebrew text look really beautiful and all this. But there's an ideology behind it. its leadership is largely Chabad. It is a very specific anchor or orientation to Jewish tradition. Be warned. I'm not saying don't take advantage of a good sale on a Art Scroll Chumash. Don't get me wrong, because it's still, they're not changing the words of the Torah if you're learning Hebrew, etc. Or they've got the Targum Onkelos in there. I like to read the rabbinic commentaries. They'll have Rashi. They'll give different rabbis say this or this, and that's part of your learning the language of the Torah and the tradition that we want to respect. But just remember that there's a book, if anybody's interested in cultural anthropology in terms of the Jewish Orthodox world, there's a book called Orthodox by Design. And it's done from a sociological perspective by a Jewish author about Judaica, the market of Judaica in the world today. And Art Scroll is one case example of how these products are marketed to look very beautiful, to the degree that in some Orthodox communities, just having the beautiful book there's a zechut, there's a merit. Even if you never open the book, having the book on your shelf represents an association with that tradition, that there's a special sanctity with the way this book is made, and that somehow my home is beautified by it. Okay, so Orthodox by Design, I don't remember, it maybe a couple years ago it came out. And it's pretty academic. It's from a cultural anthropological kind of a perspective. Anyway, rubber meets the road. Paul gives these examples. I look at how zealous I was, but I was wrong. I took Titus, who was a Gentile, up to Jerusalem. We met with Kepha and Yaakov and Yochanan, and these pseudo adelphoi, these false brothers came in. That's the second example, but we would not bend, even though they were trying to spy us out and put us under submission. Third example, these certain ones from James came up, and even Kepha himself, it says hypocrisy, that he was steered away from his hypocrisy to where these Gentiles felt shame, and now that they had to do something different to really belong. Then he goes, after giving those examples, he gets right to the rubber meets the road. These influencers are coming in here, and they're trying to get you to adopt a different language, a different way of looking at the world that has nothing to do with Messiah. And they want you to, they're excluding you, right? It's kind of this give and take. We're going to give you a little bit of what's on the inside, but we're going to keep you that. We're just going to give you these little nuggets so you know that you want more. That's what that exclusion means. And the Gentiles the Gentiles at Galatia wanted to, they're like, maybe this is legit. Maybe Paul would be on board with this. They hadn't a chance to even talk to Paul about this. Paul hears about it and writes Galatians. That's why Galatians is like fire, right? It's just like a super sharp, and it's really gritty at times. It's like hard to hear, but there was a lot at stake, right? The definition of the gospel is at stake. And so he does this, and he gives that message to them in the letter, and it shakes them up. He uses words like, you foolish Galatians, right? Who's bewitched you, etc. He's not saying that to shame them, but he's using this language to kind of shake them up and go, right? Yeshua, before you, I showed you, Yeshua was crucified and died and rose again, and you believed. And it wasn't by works of the law and getting into this community that you're interested in that you have the Ruach HaKodesh. You have the Ruach HaKodesh not by Ma'aseh HaTorah, not by works of the law, but by ek pisteos, out of faith. Out of just the simple receiving the faith of the gospel is the core. And that's the seed that will then grow, and you have to trust that it will grow. Paul uses this word, if you circumcised, this word circumcised, he uses it in a very special sense. It's in a middle voice, a present middle voice, if you know Greek. I understand him to mean not physically circumcised. It's not this. He's talking about these worlds that to become, you who are being circumcised means you who are being groomed by these zealous groups with a different agenda, being groomed to no longer be viewed as an outsider and to try to seek to be seen as an insider from their eyes. And basically the program is these influencer groups that we were talking about. They had a certain map of the world. Well, these Galatians would have had to adopt their map of the world. Oh, okay, they are the true sons of Abraham. I'm not. They are the true circumcision. I'm what they call akrobustia. I'm uncircumcised. It doesn't matter whether I'm physically circumcised or not. It's what they're labeling me as. I have their map of the world. I have to adopt that. Then I have to adopt that I'm an outsider on their map. And now I have to adopt whatever procedures they have, however long it's going to take, and whatever stages, so that I can remove the shame of this label that they keep putting on me, and I can be seen as right. And I'll just go, oh, now I'm not one of those acrobustia uncircumcised anymore. I'm now one of the circumcised, and I feel good about myself. Paul will have none of that. And I have to stop there. I went over.